Again, I would like to reiterate Dr. Manalo's feelings of how intimidating it is to be asked to react to three very thoroughly researched and argued presentations. They were indeed very interesting and informative. I found especially interesting the long and complicated history of fundamentalisms. I think Rehana's paper really shows us when bad intentions lead to worse consequences. Fundamentalism is being encouraged by Western powers, first as tools of empire, and then today to paint these same fundamentalist movements as other societies, cultures, and religions opposed to Western or secular civilization and democracy, even as or democracy or secularism. This, even as the Bush administration in the U.S. unashamedly courts, and the Republican Party in this current election season, courts Christian fundamentalists in the U.S., allowing them bigger and bigger roles to play in the shaping of policy and in projecting the image of the U.S. to the rest of the world. Filipino feminists certainly have many stories to tell, and I think in reaction to the academic papers, all I can offer up are stories to tell of their encounters with fundamentalists on home ground. The irony is that during the martial law regime, women's groups joined the fight against a dictatorship in common with church groups and others now identified with the so-called pro-life movement. We joined in their skepticism against the excesses of the Marcos population programs, including allegations of forced sterilizations in poor communities. Other issues we took up in common were the promotion of breastfeeding against the multinational corporations, a fight that goes on to this day, and the promotion of consumerism. I remember years in which we worked very closely with these church-based organizations. For myself, the differences between our groups surfaced with the hotly contested provision in the 1987 Constitution regarding the equality of women and men before the law and the so-called pro-life provision. The position of Pilipina and other women's groups at that time was that this provision should not be included in the Constitution because up till then and until now, abortion was so anathema to Philippine society that there was hardly any public debate or discussion about the issue, and that there was a need for more open and free debate before such a provision designed to close all legal doors to the legalization of abortion was included in the Constitution. And I think it was only through the intercessions of former Senator Shahani that the provision on the protection of the life of the unborn from conception was not to be allowed except to save the life of the mother. And that last was the contribution of Senator Shahani, I understand. I can personally recall my first encounter with these groups shortly after the triumphant EDSA revolt. I had given birth the day after the Marcoses fled, and so I stayed away from most of the early struggles in the early post-EDSA era. And this was the first call I got when I was ready to rejoin the world. When an urgent call came out to all women's groups to discuss a draft executive order submitted to Malacanang that would have declared, and this may sound familiar to you, declared as illegal all methods of family planning save for natural family planning. So even as early as then, there were already efforts to push such legislation because it was then an emergency, we were under emergency rule. And that was when also I had my first exposure to the women's health movement, because before then, the women's movement was divided into political and the health groups were allied with family planning organizations. And at that time, we were opposed to them. The EO was not signed because we had gathered enough signatures to oppose it, and Health Secretary then, Alran Bengzon, eventually took over the population program from the SW Secretary Mamita Pardo de Tavera, who believed the population program should be scrapped completely. But as it turns out, this was but the initial skirmish in a long battle, which is ongoing even as we talk here. For many in the women's movement, the struggle against fundamentalism seems to be centered on the issue of reproductive health, beginning with the use of the term itself, which some, including the President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, believe is but a euphemism for abortion or abortion rights. Indeed, the big guns of the church have been trained at any and all attempts to expand women's and couples' choices, reproductive choices, from its unsuccessful opposition to the Quezon City government's reproductive health policy, in the course of which Sunday masses in Quezon City were marked every week by homilies railing against the proposed ordinance, to its currently successful attempts at blocking the passage of a national reproductive health law, since amended to a responsible parenthood law, and their efforts now to muster support in opposition to the Magna Carta of Women. But women's bodies is just one area in which fundamentalism's impact on our lives as women. We are affected as well by the global war on terrorism, now painted as a global war on Islamism or Islamic governments, centered on a war against the eternal other in Philippine history, our Muslim brethren, which can be seen in the conflict in Mindanao, but also in such tempests in a teapot, like the whole argument over the building of a so-called mosque or prayer room in the Green Hills Shopping Center. And the effects of the conflicts and the basing of foreign troops here, from armed conflict and displacement of populations, from the prostitution and trafficking as a result of the basing of troops in Mindanao, to the impoverishment of communities with women bearing a disproportionate share of poverty, and the hijacking of Philippine foreign policy to fall in line with the global war on terrorism. I'd also like to share a dilemma, and I think many women here share it, posed by having a woman president whose mandate has come under growing doubt and against whom allegations of corruption have been repeatedly lodged. There have been comments that I've read on several e-groups, people asking, kababae niyang tao, bakit siya ganito? There seems to be an expectation that women leaders are more moral or less prone to sins like corruption. What has this woman president done for Filipino women is a question always raised to us. And what do Filipino women owe this second woman president? How do we relate to her, and in terms of our efforts to promote greater participation of women in politics? The contrasting celebrations on the very recent International Women's Day are merely indicative of the divide, with some women whooping it up in Malacanang for photo ops and the others marching on the streets and rallying in Plaza Miranda. I would also like to note the emergence of a new fundamentalism even within our ranks. There's a widespread disappointment over the Catholic Bishops' Conference statement that fell short of calling for GMA's resignation. And it led some commentators to fall for some kind of nostalgia for the sort of spiritual and religious leadership exercised by Jaime Cardinal Sin, forgetting that even during martial law, the CBCP had been sharply divided and rarely reached consensus, especially on political matters. The bishops have hardly been a homogeneous body in this respect. And now there is this desire for the church to take a leadership role in this current crisis, to tell us what the truth is, as if it could, and how we should act in response. Why this desire for an ultimate moral authority? Is it a refusal to exercise individual conscience, or a knee-jerk response to confusion and doubt? And our immediate reaction is to look for some higher, morally superior source of truth and guidance. This inability to make up our own minds may be a symptom of fundamentalism's continuing hold on our consciousness. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our speakers, Professor Sobritchea, Ms. Mohidin, Professor Claudio, Ambassador Manalo, and Ms. David. Our speakers are now ready for questions from the audience here in UP Diliman, as well as those in the other campuses. We have very limited time, so please keep your questions brief and direct to the point. We will entertain the first question from our audience here in NISMED. If you wish to ask a question, kindly raise your hand. And if I call you, kindly approach one of the microphones on the floor, state your name and your college or affiliation, and perhaps to whom you wish to address your question, and then go to your question. Shall we have them? Yes, please.
Good afternoon to our speakers and to our reactors, to everyone in NISMED, and to my fellow UP students, or everyone in general. Ma'am, we are aware...
May we have your name, please, and your college?
I'm Cyrene Angelique Joey Bajo from CSSP. I'm taking BA Philosophy, but I'm here as a resident of Ilang Ilang Residence Hall. I would like to address this question to Dr. Sobritchea, because it has been emphasized in your paper. But first of all, we are aware of the genital mutilations, the extremity of the oppressions that women are undergoing around the world. There was also a part in your paper that you said that we should always uphold the separation between the state and the church. Then there's a question, the question for me is that how do we demarcate our want to educate women on the choices that we have, because we are pro-choice, from our meddling, quote-unquote, for lack of any better term to use, meddling with their rights to practice, or freedom to practice religious beliefs. That's it.
Yes, please. Dr. Sobritchea.
Personally, I don't see any conflict with it, with your fundamental human rights to exercise belief, religion, and to be educated in UP, I think, and get all the knowledge that you need in order to be a good citizen, in order to exercise your individual talent, capacity as well. I'm sorry I couldn't. Do you see any conflict between the two?
Yes, ma'am. Because